Before acting was acting, it was pretending. People hit their marks, spoke their lines, and gestured just enough to convince you they meant it. Then came Marlon Brando, and pretending was never the same again. He didn't act, he radiated. Every shrug, every sigh, every pause felt like the world's secrets were being whispered through a mumble. He made vulnerability look dangerous, and danger look divine. In the 1950s, audiences had never seen anything like him. He wasn't polished, he was alive. He didn't play characters, he became them, devouring the screen until even his co-stars seemed to orbit his gravity. But here's the paradox. The same man who gave acting its soul spent the rest of his life trying to escape it. He called Hollywood a meat grinder, fame a disease, and art a prison made of applause. So tonight, we're stepping into the strange, brilliant, self-destructive universe of Marlon Brando to ask one impossible question. How does a man revolutionize acting so completely and then come to despise everything he stood for? Marlon Brando didn't come from Hollywood, he came to destroy it. At the Actors Studio, under Stella Adler, he learned a new gospel. Acting wasn't about pretending, it was about feeling. Every gesture, every silence, every twitch of an eyebrow had to come from a truth buried somewhere deep and uncomfortable. The method, they called it, and Brando turned it into a religion. Where old Hollywood actors spoke like Shakespearean salesmen, Brando mumbled like a man who didn't have time for punctuation. Then came A Streetcar Named Desire. Audiences watched him not as an actor, but as a live wire, unpredictable, magnetic, dangerous. He sweated through his t-shirts, snarled through his lines, and made vulnerability look masculine. It wasn't performance, it was combustion. By the time On the Waterfront arrived, Brando had redefined cinema itself. He didn't just act in that film, he confessed in it. The famous line, "I could have been a contender," wasn't just dialogue, it was marrow. While other actors performed, Brando existed, sweating, muttering, and making everyone else look like they were reciting tax codes. He wasn't playing Stanley Kowalski or Terry Malloy. He was playing every man who ever felt too much and said too little. And for the first time in film history, audiences didn't see a star, they saw themselves. By the mid-1950s, Marlon Brando wasn't just famous, he was atomic. He didn't walk into Hollywood, he detonated in it. Every studio wanted him, every director feared him, and every magazine tried to turn him into a pin-up for dangerous charm. He became the reluctant face of rebellion. Leather jacket, brooding eyes, the eternal cigarette dangling from a mouth that looked allergic to sincerity. He was the original bad boy, the template for James Dean, Elvis, every teenage angst poster for the next half-century. But here's the cruel joke. Brando never wanted to be cool. He wanted to be truthful. He wanted to act from the soul. But Hollywood wanted him shirtless on a motorcycle. And fame for him was a slow-acting poison. The applause that once felt electric began to sound like static. He called acting a craft for liars, yet he couldn't stop perfecting the lie. As the world obsessed over his image, Brando started retreating from it, sabotaging interviews, mocking journalists, refusing to play the celebrity game. Because behind the smirk and the swagger was a man already wrestling with the monster he'd helped create. He made rebellion look effortless, and spent the rest of his life rebelling against himself. Every comet burns brightest before it disintegrates, and by the 1960s, Marlon Brando was blazing his way straight into chaos. Mutiny on the Bounty was supposed to be another epic, a showcase for his genius. Instead, it became a cautionary tale, written in studio panic and tropical humidity. Brando feuded with directors, rewrote his lines, delayed shoots, and somewhere between takes, gained a small nation's worth of weight. One producer famously called him a genius who no longer cared about being one. It was the start of Brando's great unravelling, not a fall from grace, but a bored walk off the cliff. The man who once electrified the screen now seemed to be experimenting with how far he could push a studio before it collapsed. As one co-star put it, Marlon didn't just bite the hand that fed him. He sued it for emotional damage. He turned artistic integrity into open rebellion, and Hollywood, that gleaming factory of make-believe, had no idea how to contain him. Directors called him impossible. Crews whispered about his tantrums. Critics mourned the loss of the actor who once gave cinema its heartbeat. But beneath the arrogance was something deeper, a man disgusted by the machinery of fame, choking on the very myth he'd built. He wanted purity in an industry made of compromise, and when he couldn't find it, he did what Brando always did. He destroyed everything in reach, including himself. This wasn't just an actor in decline. It was a revolution eating its own creator. After a decade of exile and excess, the world had written Marlon Brando off. Too difficult, too volatile, too gone. But then came the Godfather, and the resurrection began, not with noise, but with a whisper. This was not the bellowing rebel of A Streetcar Named Desire. This was an old lion, wounded, weary, and infinitely dangerous. Brando didn't act the Godfather. He evaporated into him. Every movement, every murmur carried the weight of generations. He turned silence into dominance, a rasp into scripture. Behind the camera, life was still chaos, lawsuits, debts, the same mercurial storms that haunted him. But on screen, Brando was serenity incarnate, a man who had made peace with power. That cotton-stuffed jaw, that half-closed gaze, they became the vocabulary of authority itself. And Hollywood, ever fickle, fell to its knees once again. The same studios that once swore never to hire him now treated him like a returning deity. Because when Brando decided to care, everyone else stopped breathing. This was more than a comeback. It was proof that art can survive its artist. That genius, however self-destructive, can still find its way home, if only for one last, perfect performance. He had burned every bridge, yet somehow the world built him a throne from the ashes. And for a brief, trembling moment, Marlon Brando ruled again. Not as the rebel, not as the outcast, but as the quiet god of cinema. By the late 1970s, Brando had become a myth. 1 part legend, 2 parts warning label. When Francis Ford Coppola summoned him for Apocalypse Now, it wasn't just a casting choice. It was an invocation. Brando arrived in the Philippines like a storm cloud. Overweight, unprepared, reading the script for the first time on set. Coppola panicked. The crew despaired. Somewhere in the chaos, cinema found its fever dream. They hid him in shadows to mask the transformation, not of a character, but of a man dissolving into his own myth. Out went the tidy lines of war and morality. In came Colonel Kurtz, the poet of horror, the philosopher of decay. Brando mumbled, improvised, rewrote the movie from inside his own labyrinth. Coppola would later say directing him was like trying to photograph a ghost. Magnificent, impossible, terrifying. It was art imitating madness, or maybe madness imitating art. No one could tell any more, least of all Brando. In those humid, half-lit monologues, he became both the film's subject and its symptom. A man staring so long into the darkness that the darkness began to stare back. Apocalypse. Now wasn't just Brando's last great role. It was his confession, whispered through the jungle, that genius, left unchecked, eventually devours itself. By the 1990s, the fire had cooled. The rebel who once burned down Hollywood now preferred silence. The great actor who no longer wished to perform. He turned down films, mocked his own fame, and retreated to his private island in Tahiti like a man exiled from the world he'd conquered. In interviews, he spoke in riddles, sometimes profound, sometimes absurd. He talked about truth, humanity, injustice, love, and then about the pointlessness of it all. It was as if he were constantly arguing with the ghosts of his own brilliance. The world saw an eccentric recluse, but beneath the jokes, the weight gain, the myth of the difficult man, there was fatigue. He had spent his life tearing masks off performance, only to find the biggest mask was fame itself. He acted to find reality, and when he found it, raw, unfiltered, human, he realized how unbearable it could be. Clips fade in from Last Tango in Paris, the score, fragments of talk shows, a weary smile behind the legend's eyes. Brando once said, "The only reason I'm here is because I don't know where else to be." That's the tragedy of a man who touched the soul of acting and found it too fragile to hold. He spent his life chasing authenticity and discovered it was the most painful role of all. He began as a storm, wild, electric, impossible to contain. On stage, on screen, he didn't just perform, he exposed. He turned acting inside out until it bled truth. Marlon Brando changed film forever. He shattered the old illusions, stripped away the artifice, and made cinema tremble with something it had never felt before. Raw humanity. Every whisper, every twitch, every silence became a confession. But there was a cost. When you tear the mask from art, you risk losing the comfort of illusion, and maybe yourself with it. He broke cinema open so something real could crawl out. And maybe in the end, that's what broke him too. He didn't just act, he made the world believe. And then he stopped believing himself.